Hello everybody, my name is Valérie Courtas. I work in the NDC team and I'm very happy to welcome you to our InFocus webinar. Today we will be discussing NDC distribution in China and it will be presented by Brian Wilson, our consultant. Let's go through the agenda first. We will first have a short introduction to NDC InFocus, and then I will hand over to Brian, who will give you some highlights on the topic of today. And you will have an opportunity at the end of this webinar to ask your questions using the chat functionality on the left-hand side of your screen. So what is NDC InFocus? It's a series of two-page documents and webinars aimed at providing you a quick overview of the hot topic related to NDC of the moment. So we have had already a series of documents published around the BSP, payments, standard, and they are all available on our iata.org. As you can see the link on the slide, and also the recordings of the past webinars are also available there for your reference. So with no further ado, I will hand over to Brian, who will go through the next slides with you.
So, hello everybody. I was asked by IATA to travel around China a few months back, visiting airlines, system providers and agencies to try and understand what was happening in distribution and particularly with NDC. And in this webinar, I'm going to summarize what we learnt in that trip. And I'm going to present this, first of all, by a little bit of an introduction to the airline community and what airlines have to do. Then we're going to talk a little bit about technology, travel, payment systems, and especially mobile payments. And then a few words about the big OTAs in China. Then we'll move to a kind of conclusion of what is happening on airline distribution and understand how things have evolved from a fairly simple GDS distribution to one today with lots of different ways of things progressing and with some clarity as to what the future might be. So, thinking about the different airlines, of which we've met 8, I think everybody probably understands that China is dominated by 3 very, very big airlines with subsidiaries, but there are many other airlines as well. But the thing that is in common is that all of these airlines are using TravelSky as their PSS host. I think the other thing that makes a big difference to how NDC is going to have any impact, though, is 2 things. Firstly, that there aren't really low-cost carriers, with a possible exception of Spring in China. So there isn't the product differentiation between different types of airlines. And especially as the government requires that every airline must offer a free checked bag, in-flight catering and seat selection as part of the flight price. A second requirement from the government is that by the end of this year, airlines must be able to show that at least 50% of their sales were being made through direct channels, and hence some pressure on what the word direct might actually mean. But as at the moment, IATA has certified 10 Chinese airlines as being NDC capable. So moving on to the technology situation, just as in the Western world we've got Facebook, Amazon and Google as our dominant players, the exact 3 equivalents in China are Tencent, Alibaba and Baidu, with Tencent also, like Facebook with WhatsApp, Tencent has WhatsApp, which they have then moved to provide a payment system which is incredibly popular in China, WeChat Pay. Alibaba, on the other hand, is the owner of Fliggy, the 3rd largest online travel agent, as well as, of course, as having its Alipay product. where Baidu might be a search engine, but it's also 25% owner of Ctrip, the biggest OTA. And Ctrip itself has cross-ownership into Priceline and Booking.com, with whom they work in partnership. And Ctrip then owns part of Qunar, the second largest OTA. And to be clear, many people think Qunar might be meta-search, but for air travel, Qunar is definitely an OTA. And then finally, we saw Ctrip making acquisitions of Skyscanner and Travel Fusion, so that they extend their ownership. If we then think about mobile payments, well, in China, this is the norm. You go into the corner shop, you use mobile, the picture on the right, you use a taxi, he shows you which of the mobile payments that he would prefer you to use. And this is an incredibly cost-effective payment system, with merchant fees well under 0.5%. And this is guaranteeing you a payment. It's very effective, and indeed, even within that small amount of money, the person making the purchase can often get a kickback in that amount of money. But this is all pervasive in China. So then, if we think next about the OTAs, there are 6 very large OTAs, and they are all very technologically capable. They're happy to take NDC, they tell XML of different formats, but they would prefer them, of course, in the same formats. When we met Ctrip, they said on the international side, their preference, not surprisingly, was that airlines provide them content through Travel Fusion, which, if you remember, they now own. But within that, they could take the sophisticated airline product. But they had a word of message for any airlines wishing to provide them with NDC content. Make sure it's got your best price. If you've got another channel to us with a better price, then we're not going to use NDC. Secondly, make sure that you've got performance in what you are providing. And thirdly, make sure you provide servicing tools, because so many trips, of course, get changed, and we need an easy way of doing it. And those messages were also shared by Fliggy, but they also made the point to us that they were concerned about the complexity of the different types of responses that airlines would make, and how difficult that might make it for them to provide a display showing those competing products in different styles. Whereas Maya said to us, well, look, we're ready for NDC. We've reached out to airlines in order to ask them for content, but we find that you're not providing it to us. So they were ready. And the final message was, please, can you make sure that your tickets get issued within China and don't end up with a neutral ticket that gets issued in a different BSP like Hong Kong, which was happening at that time. Now, moving on to maybe the crux of this presentation, to talk about the different ways in which distribution is taking place in China. So if we start by looking at this diagram with TravelSky providing that PSS capability and being the GDS for, of course, not just Chinese airlines, but for all of the other airlines for providing filed content, and that being provided on the right-hand side to the BSP agents, a traditional perspective of distribution if we're going back 20 years around the world. However, what happened in China was TravelSky also produced a platform like an agent portal, carrier direct portal, which they offered for some airlines. And that allows agents who are not necessarily BSP agents to look at and to book travel, which would then be ticketed by those particular airlines. And that became a popular product, particularly for agencies that wanted to reduce the cost of their BSP participation. However, when e-commerce was starting, not unsurprisingly, airlines started to want to develop their own capability, and TravelSky rather confusingly provided an entry point into the PSS that they called IBE. This is not an internet booking engine, it's merely a connectivity tool. And with that, you can have a variety of connections to agents, either coming to a portal, it could be used for consumer site, or indeed it could be used for a direct connect. So, as a further evolution, the GDS business in TravelSky provided a content provider capability they called LinkStar that provided XML content to 200 of the largest agencies across China. And this became a very popular product within the GDS capability. And indeed, some, 14 perhaps, overseas airlines are also available through that Link Air product into that larger group of agencies. So where does NDC fit? Well, perhaps the first airline that did NDC in China realized that from our e-commerce capability that they had, that they could add an NDC API and connect, in the first case that I was aware of, Colorful Guizhou, who connected to the 6 OTAs, and they found very quickly that they had 70% of their indirect sales were using NDC. But that one was a little bit exceptional. What happened for more Chinese airlines was that TravelSky added an NDC API to the CDP service. And if an airline wished to use this, and a number of airlines acquired their certification as NDC players from IATA as a result of using that TravelSky API. Some of them then did not continue to use it, and only a couple, to my knowledge, are actually making volume use of it today. However, TravelSky later acquired OpenJaw and implemented a product that they called TRP, Travel Retail Platform, and that provides an XML capability that we heard this morning actually now is also an NDC API, and that allows content to be provided using a merchandising store that for the first time an airline is controlling, albeit though that the TRP merchandising store rather relates to ground products rather than to the more typical airline ancillary product set. At the same time, on the GDS side of TravelSky, the LinkStar team have also produced an NDC XML interface. So they can provide NDC content to agencies, and they are ready to accept NDC content from overseas airlines. However, whilst that capability was there when we visited a few months back, they were still looking to reach out to airlines wishing to use it. And indeed, looking at that diagram with TravelSky, we had to all agree it's a little bit confusing for airlines. So what is it that's missing? Well, fundamentally, what we really want is an NDC aggregator capability, whether it's Travel Fusion, TravelSky, whether it's a competing Western group like Amadeus, but the space for this to be created still on that diagram. And then any airline with an NDC API using its offer and order management system could provide content which would surely be in demand by the large agencies, certainly the big OTAs in China, and that would be a way forward. Meanwhile, of course, TravelSky are thinking about what their strategy is in order to fill that gap, but they're also focusing on one order. every Chinese airline wanted to ask us about one order. And perhaps China is the place to implement one order because the departure control, the revenue accounting is all being done through the Travel Sky systems. So it might be a much easier place to move on from NDC into one order. So a complex diagram, but I hope one which you would agree with me provides space for the future and for an uptake of NDC. There was absolutely no doubting the interest from airlines to proceed in this direction, and there was no doubting the interest of the travel agents to improve the product. So, in summary, what would I say? Yes, there is that capability from the airlines. Western airlines can find agencies. It might be difficult to find aggregators, but don't wait too long before we will find that's going to happen. And Travel Sky realizes this. They realize they've got two responsibilities, two opportunities. Firstly, to their distribution product, just as we hear from the Western GDSs, a desire to produce a seamless desktop, so Travel Sky has that opportunity to merge GDS content with NDC content. But for the airlines that they are hosting on the PSS side, to evolve that investment that they have made in OpenJaw to improve that product and allow Chinese airlines to provide that content not just in China, but to overseas. And there was certainly no lack of interest again from the Chinese airlines to provide NDC content outside of China. So the next move is probably going to come from Travel Sky, clarifying what its strategy is to move forward. But the big Chinese market is available for anybody who wants to participate. It might be slightly different in some places, but we're moving towards that standardization offered by NDC in the use of offer and order management. So with that, I'm going to finish the presentation, and we're ready to take any questions from you.
If you want to ask questions, can you please use the chat functionality so you can write your questions in writing in the chat.
We're just having a look to see if we can answer the question about what level have they received. But you remember my caution, it's not just the level, it's whether they are actually using it and passing the certification in the case of the Chinese airlines isn't an indication of the fact that they are actually making use of this and actually concluding orders. But we're just looking at the NDC certification, and it looks as if they are level 3. Yeah.
Most carriers in China are level 3 certified, and if you want the exact messages and versions, you can refer to the NDC registry on the IATA.org. We have our certification registries that list all the airlines, so worldwide, but also the Chinese one, and their level of certification.
So why do we think QNAR is an OTA? Basically because it is being provided content through a conventional channel, and it is issuing tickets as an agent. It has nothing to do with the fact that it has a relationship with Ctrip. The confusion on the meta search is because Cunard is operating as meta search on the hotel side. So for hotels, it's clearly looking at, it provides the actually the inventory for a very large number of the second tier Chinese hotels, and as a result of all of this, it has a different role to play for hotels. But for travel, it's just like an OTA. So the question about ticketing, if you're selling in China, please issue the ticket in China, collect the money through the Chinese BSP, and then there is no currency complexity. What was happening if you ended up issuing the ticket in a different BSP, the customer was ending up with essentially a different currency to the one in which the sale process had happened in, which obviously was very unpopular with clients. So can you, of course, issue your own? Yes, of course you can issue your own tickets. It's just making sure that you have ticketed, just as I'm sure you would do in a sales shop of your own in China or at the airport. You're going to issue the ticket. It's going to be in Chinese currency, and there is going to be no confusion. There's absolutely no problem with airline issued tickets, but it's just making sure that you don't try and move it to a different currency by having it issued in a different BSP. So yes, the question about payment. In many cases, the OTA is indeed accepting the payment, and then they are forwarding another payment onto the BSP. And the reason why that becomes more practical in China, of course, is because of the merchant fees involved in these transactions. So when the fees are really, really low, and if you're a large Chinese OTA, then you're certainly not going to be paying that 0.5%, or probably less than half of that, in which case it's not a problem to relay the payments in that particular way. And so, yes, Chinese people would expect that they are going to pay through those Chinese mobile payment forms. So providing facilities for Alipay, for WeChat Pay becomes really quite important if you wish to sell directly to customers. Of course, if you're talking about NDC going through an OTA, then they will worry about that payment with you. Our sense of TravelSky, do they have a single vision? TravelSky is undoubtedly a very complicated large company, and it changes its organization, and I guess our sense is as it evolves, it is changing. One clear improvement, as I would see it, was that they had amalgamated the management of the GDS and CDP groups, and that seemed more likely to integrate the products that they were offering. But it's not clear yet that there is a clear strategy for them, and it is a challenge for them to produce that single vision. But meanwhile, the Chinese airlines are reasonably tolerant and are waiting for Travel Sky to progress, some more than others, but there is clearly space until that Travel Sky strategy actually gets revealed and delivered in clear products.
You still have a couple of minutes to ask your remaining questions. In the meantime, I'll just give you, please continue typing if you have any questions. I'll just give you an overview of the next NDC InFocus webinars. So we will have two topics for December. So one will be on one order and what you need to know today as part of your NDC deployment to scale to the one order program in the future. And then we will have a second webinar on NDC at scale and what are the criteria that have been discussed and agreed to be the criteria to allow you to scale in the future and reach critical mass of NDC transactions. And as I mentioned earlier, you can watch the past recording of NDC InFocus on our website. And also, I think we have one more question, so I'll just... Okay, yeah, sorry. The presentation, this recording will be put online as of tomorrow. You will be able to see and watch again the recording and see the slides online. So you can see the link on the website here. You just click on it and you will see the past recording and the one of today as of tomorrow. I think we have no more questions, so I would like to thank Brian for the presentation and all of you for attending it, and we hope to see you in one of our upcoming webinars. Thank you and have a good evening.